graphing the sine function, and it's very similar to graphing the cosine function, and our calculator is going to be very useful here. But first, you notice on the side here, I have listed a couple of things, and you want to do this every time. A, B, P, I, G. And you could come up with creative acronyms to help you remember that. You could call it the AB pig. You could come up with really anything for these letters. I don't something like all boy, always buy pizza in groups, something like that. Whatever you need to help you remember, the AB pig. And you want to list these things out before you even go over to the graph. Now, the A stands for your amplitude, the coefficient of the function. In this case, for y equals sine x, that is 1. B is your frequency, that's coefficient of x, also 1. Period is 2 pi divided by b. And so in this case, that's going to be 2 pi over 1, which is just 2 pi. So that right there tells us a couple of things. We know our graph is going to go as high as 1. We're only going to have one cycle from 0 to 2 pi, and our first cycle is going to end at 2 pi. Amplitude, frequency, and period. And you should be pretty familiar with those three. We've discussed them already in some depth. The I and the G are a little bit new. Now, the I stands for interval, and the way you get interval is by doing your period divided by 4. And so in this case, our period was 2 pi. You're going to divide that by 4, and that gives you pi over 2. And so you're going to have intervals of pi over 2. And I'm going to explain that a little bit when I get to the graphs. Now, group, or G, it stands for guide, actually, is probably the best thing to remember. It stands for. The thing about guide is you need to memorize, there's a pattern for sine. And the pattern for sine is that it goes, I'm going to use a different color for this. The pattern for sine is that it goes 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. And you start off the same way with that for G, for your guide. 0, 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. And those are your guide numbers. And if you look at your graph for sine x, and if we graph it, where these numbers come from are kind of the key numbers, because we know sine has, at sine 30 it's 1/2, and sine 60 it's rad 3 over 2 and stuff like that. But the easy ones to remember are, here we have 0, 1, 0, -1, and 0. And so I'm talking about the y value at these key points, where the graph starts, the first quarter, I guess, or first quartile, the middle of the graph, second quartile, the 3/4 of the graph, the third quartile, and where it ends. And so these are your 5 kind of guide numbers, and you have to memorize for sine that it goes 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. Now let me just remove this, and we'll actually use that picture later to help kind of check our work. But anyways, your guide numbers that you write down there, you always write 0, 1, 0, -1, 0, and then you look at your amplitude, because whatever your A is, whatever your amplitude is, or in this case, just A, whatever this number is, you have to multiply your G numbers by that. Now, because it's 1, multiplying by 1 is actually not going to do anything here. So that's going to stay 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. But if that was, a 5 or something like that, we would multiply all those numbers by 5, and we'd end up with 0, 5, 0, -5, 0. But we'll get to an example of that in a minute. So this is where you start. Now, because this is sine, you start at the origin. And I'm graphing all these graphs in this video from 0 to 2 pi. Sometimes they ask you to graph from 0 to pi, or -pi to pi, or -2 pi to 2 pi, and you just kind of need to continue the waves. But to keep it kind of simple, we're just going to do 0 to 2 pi for these videos. And so we start at 0 for our origin, and that's our first one. And then we go to 1 is our next value, and that's going to be at your first interval, pi over 2. And so pi over 2 is 1. And we see here labeled we have pi over 2, so that is 1. And then our next number is 0, and that goes to the next interval. And your next interval is just another pi over 2. So we see we start at 1 pi over 2. Now you go to 2 pi over 2. And 2 pi over 2 is the same thing as just pi. And so pi is 0. Then you go to 3 pi over 2. And that's going to be your negative 1. And 3 pi over 2. This is labeled wrong here. That's supposed to be 3 pi over 2, not 2 pi over 3. You know, our 270 mark. And then at 4 pi over 2, you have the last one is 0. And 4 pi over 2 is the same thing as 2 pi. And then try to draw a smooth curve. Actually, I could do better than that. That wasn't very good either. Like that. And then lastly, what you should do is you should type it into your calculator and kind of compare pictures. I see that this is what it is. You might have to adjust your window to whatever you're graphing, you know, but just type it in and compare pictures and see if it looks as it should. All right, so let's go to a second example here. Y equals 3 sine 2x. And first, my A is 3, my B is 2, my period is 2 pi over B, so 2 pi over 2 is pi, and so that's where my first cycle is going to end. My interval is my period divided by 4, so that's pi over 4. You know, last time our intervals were pi over 2, so we had 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2. This time my interval is pi over 4, and my guide is still 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, but I have to multiply it by a. And up here we see a is 3, so that's going to change to 0, 3, 0, negative 3, 0, because I multiply all those numbers by a. So I start for sine at 0 at the origin. You know, the only time that would change is if I had, you know, some sort of shift, like a vertical shift or a horizontal shift. We'll talk about that later, though. And then I use my interval. Now, my first interval of pi over 4 is 3. So at pi over 4, I have 3. On my graph, I have pi over 2. So halfway between that is pi over 4. And so that is 3. And then my second interval would be 2 pi over 4. And that would be 0. 2 pi over 4 reduces to pi over 2. And then 3 pi over 4 is going to be the negative 3. So that's 3/4 pi. And 4 pi over 4 is the last 0, and that is just pi. And so notice that what this does, it just gives you one cycle. And notice that our cycle is ending at pi. Our first cycle is ending at pi. But I want to graph from 0 to 2 pi. So all I need to do is just continue the pattern. That I'm going over pi over 4 each time and just continue my pattern. And that's it. You know, what you need to be careful about, which is on this bottom example, but I'm not going to do it because this video is running a little bit long, that if this number is negative, just remember you're multiplying all your guide numbers by that. And so say this was a negative 3, I'd end up with 0, negative 3, 0, positive 3, 0. And what you would see is basically the same thing, but it would be upside down. It would start down instead of up. So just remember to always multiply your guide numbers by whatever your A value is. And go from there. And if you have to continue the pattern to fill your whole window, then you do so. And of course, don't forget to check this in the calculator. So I'm going to type in 3 sine 2x. And my window is set from 0 to 2 pi, and I see I have an amplitude of 3, a frequency of 2 cycles. My first cycle ends at pi. My pictures match, so I know I'm good.